Well, we may have some folks trickling in still, but I think we can go ahead and get started since these sessions, the Gilead Grant sessions, are designed to be 30 minutes. So I thought I would give kind of an overview and go into a little more detail. Was anyone not on this morning's session? That'll give me an idea of if I need to repeat what I said earlier. Everyone was on this morning? Perfect. So I'm going to show you where to find some of the documents and give you an overview, and there will be plenty of time for questions at the end too, but feel free to ask questions as you go. I'm going to try and leave some pauses in, but if I get on a roll, which sometimes happens, feel free to interrupt and ask questions or ask me to slow down too.
I just got a call from Maggie.
All right, so for those who don't know me, my name is Traci Ruhland Petty, pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I'm the administrative missioner for Gilead. So what that means is I get to work with Gilead Grants. I am not on the grant review committee, so I'm not the one who actually makes recommendations to the board. I do more of the organizing and all the administrative stuff that goes along with grants. So I get people set up to meet with the review committee. I get all the application and materials in, and I'm kind of your first line, first resource for if you have questions and need information. So kind of those roles, so that's my role. The grant review committee are the ones who actually take a look over the grants and recommend to the board of directors the grants for funding and for how much. The board of directors are the ones who actually decide, they approve or deny the grant applications and the amounts. So those are kind of three different roles that are part of that.
Traci, do you have a way to tell Meg that Maggie is stranded in the waiting room?
Let me text, I believe Julianne is in there. So let me text her real quick. Does she
Sorry about that.
No worries. Does she need to be in this session?
She needs to be in the thing at all. I don't know if this is the session she wanted to be in, but she's not being allowed into the session.
Okay. Okay, I've let Julianne know, and yeah, sometimes there's a little bit of lag depending on how many people are trying to get back in. So she'll.
Sorry to interrupt.
No worries. So I thought I would screen share with you and kind of go through an overview of the process. So let me get that pulled up. Actually, before I do that, how many people have ideas for grants and that's why you're here today? Okay. Let's go from the top. So to find information on the grants, if you go to the homepage of the diocesan website and go to resources, in that dropdown, there's a Gilead Grant page. So when you click on that, it's going to take you here. I'm going to skip over some of the stuff at the top. There are grant categories listed because your idea would need to fit into one of these grant categories, and most ideas do. If you're not quite sure what your grant might fit under, that's a conversation that I can have with you and that you can have with the grant review committee, and they can help point you in the right direction of which application would fit your project best. And so I'm going to go down to, if you only look at one section on this web page, it's going to be this part here. There's instructions on before, ready, and after you submit an application. So if, like me, you are a person who likes a checklist in chronological order, this document, the grant application process, that's going to be your go-to document. It's going to list everything that I'm about to talk about, but it has little checkboxes so you can check things off as you go to make sure you've got the documents you need. So kind of first step, once you have an idea, is you'll want to take a look over this page and some of the documents to get an idea of what you're getting into. And at any time, I'm happy to answer questions as you're working with your congregation or nonprofit group that you're partnered with, can help answer questions and direct you to where you might need to go. Like I mentioned in the earlier meeting, one of the things that we do want to be very explicit about is that part of this process is having you meet with the grant review committee before you submit your application. we found last year that kind of the sweet spot time to meet with them is when you have an idea or you've got a couple ideas and maybe aren't sure which one you might want to do, but you haven't actually gone through and prepared all of your documents yet. The reason for that being is that they can really help ask some clarifying questions up front and get you thinking about some things that you might want to include with your application. And so if you do that kind of before you have everything ready, they might have some ideas of people you could partner with or things like that. So you can meet with them anytime before you submit, but found that that tended to be the most helpful, somewhere between idea, but before you've written anything for the application yet. And then, like I mentioned earlier, the application, you can't submit it until between May 15th and July 15th. That's the open period. And so right now, if you were to click on grant application, it's not going to take you anywhere because we're not in that 60-day period yet. But if you wanted to see all of the questions that are on the applications, that's this prepare your application document. And sorry, there's a very loud car going by right now. This is going to have all of the questions that are in every single application, and I'm going to go into that in just a minute to give you a little bit more detail. Once you've met with the grant committee, you've gotten everything together, you're ready to submit, and it's that open period, you would click on grant application down here, and it's going to take you to an online form. It populates itself, so when you pick which grant you're submitting, it automatically gives you the questions you need, so you don't need to worry about that. And there are a few documents you're going to want to have ready because you will upload them into the application. This Episcopal endorsement letter is something, and we give some examples of that in the prepare your application. That's going to be something like vestry minutes or a letter from a clergy person. It could be a letter from the chapter, something that says you have some support for this project from an Episcopal person or group. And the grant committee is great with helping people think through who that might be if you're a little stuck with where to go for that. Letters of support or statements of partnership. In almost every grant last year, they were able to think of some ideas of who to get these letters from. They're not required, but it does really strengthen your application. So even some of the technology grants that people applied for, even though that's kind of an internal congregation thing, you're not necessarily partnering with a community organization, you could get a letter of support from a parishioner who's interested in the online services or has been attending if you're getting equipment for that. So they have some great ideas of some ways to kind of boost up your application. And then this budget template, your budget is required and any other financial documents you want to have to support your application. And we do give a template on here. It's pretty straightforward. But we do want to make this process kind of as low barrier as possible since not everyone's applied for a grant before. We had at least one applicant last year who had never done any type of grant, thought it was going to be very intimidating and difficult to do, and actually had a great time with this. So they were a great testament to that this is something that you can do even if you've never done it before. And that's really what we want this to be, is to kind of dip your toe into the water of applying for grants. And then after you submit, there's a form, this grant acknowledgement processing form. After you get your application, everything in, you just fill this out saying that if you get funding, you're acknowledging that you'll be responsible for it and for the reporting that goes along with it. And after that also, once I get your application, I contact people to set up times to do that after meeting with the grant review committee. And in there, they'll ask clarifying questions if there's anything on the application you submitted that they're not quite sure or they'd like more information on. That's an opportunity for you to clarify that. So it's not just a submit and you're approved or denied. You actually have a chance to make your case after you submit to, which I would find helpful. I know I've worked on other grants where I thought of something I wanted to include after I'd submitted it, or I didn't write something quite clear enough that I thought could be clearer. So we got a lot of feedback from applicants that it was nice to have that opportunity after they submitted too. So I want to take a pause here and see what questions you all have so far.
So we need to meet with the committee first. how often is the committee meeting, or how do we get a meeting?
Yes, great question. To get a meeting, contact me. How often kind of depends on the season that we're in. So the committee is all volunteer, as most things are from the diocese. And so some of it does depend on their availability. The meeting times tend to be a little scattered. Like if you asked to get a meeting with them now, there wouldn't be quite as many opportunities, but we'd be able to get you something. Once we get into the actual grant season, and especially in that last few weeks when we know that folks are kind of scrambling to get things in, they do have more times to meet. But I would suggest the earlier the better, and that's something I can help you set up with them.
Okay, thank you.
What else? Yes.
I'm sorry. So I saw the categories of grants that you have. What if something, because I noticed in the in connections with the advertisement that came out, the categories as well, but it was also the other page listed the grants that were given out in 2020. And so what if an idea that you have kind of falls into a couple of categories?
Yep, great question. That would be something to talk in that initial meeting with your grant committee members. That's something that they can help you brainstorm. They're going to ask you a little bit about your idea, and you can be at the very beginning stages of having an idea where you haven't fleshed anything out, or you can have everything kind of set in your mind, and whatever stage you're at with that is totally fine. But they'll be able to help direct you after talking with you a little bit more about your project on which application they would recommend, or sorry, which category they'd recommend. So that'll be a conversation with them, because there were a couple last year that could have fit into more than one, but they thought it would fit a little bit better into one than the others. And so they're going to recommend that to you.
Okay, so it has to fit into one of the categories. It can't just be, well, it could be here, here, here. We have to be definitive when we apply as to what category we're applying for.
Correct. The main reason for that is that there are different amounts available. There are caps on how much you can apply for in the categories, and depending on whether it's a new project or a growth type thing. And the applications have slightly different questions depending on the category. Because in the tools and technology application, we ask where you're housing the tools and technology, and obviously that wouldn't be relevant if you're doing liturgical space renewal, and that has nothing to do with technology. So those questions are tailored to the grant category.
Ah, okay.
Other questions?
Could we do 2 applications? Because I can see that we definitely need some technology, but maybe one of the other areas we might have some interest as well. Or does that make it like you're competing against yourself to have 2 in?
No, you can absolutely do 2 applications. The caveat with that is that your project leader needs to be different for your applications, and they do need to be different categories. So you couldn't apply for 2 technology grants for the same project, but you could do a technology grant and the strengthening a ministry grant if you have a pantry or something that you're looking to kind of expand. And we did have that actually with 2 congregations last year had different projects and applied and ended up getting grants. St. Paul's was one of them, and one of them was with community partners. So yes, absolutely. If it's different projects, that's your main thing. And the grant committee will ask to, because as the bishop mentioned earlier, the amount of funding available isn't set just yet. That gets set a little bit closer to the date because it depends on how many funds are in at that time. And so who gets funded depends not only on the strength of applications, but on how much they have to give away for a given year. So the grant committee will ask, usually in that second meeting, about the potential to scale back your project. Like if you didn't get the full amount of funding, could you still do the project, and what might that look like? So they'll prompt you to start thinking about that at that initial meeting, but that is something to think about as you're planning to, what could you do if you didn't get the full amount you requested? Great questions. What else so far?
Maybe a quick run through the categories and talk about what they've been used for, just to kind of help people imagine if they haven't got a project yet.
Yep, absolutely. I'm going to share, I'm going to go back to the website. And I'm going to click into this prepare your application because I'm going to show you what the application looks like and the questions for those different categories. And there are a few prompts in there, but I'll share with you some of what was funded last year to help with those ideas. So the important thing with the application, the actual application when you fill it out is online, and it is not this confusing. This is only a bit confusing because it's a PDF. And so there are these instructions at the top, and I'm happy to walk through this with people in person if this is just too much. If you need a refresher later, let me know. This is not the document you actually fill out. This is just to help people in this off season when the application's not up for you to fill in so that you could prepare your answers ahead of time. Every grant, no matter the category, you're going to have to answer contact information questions, including like who is your project leader, things like that. And then in the application, this A9, which of the following categories best fits your proposal? When you click on that in the actual application, it's going to then take you to the page with all your correct questions. This document has the questions for every single category's applications. That's why it's a bit much, but we wanted to give people, especially if you're looking at more than one category and trying to figure out where things fit, this is a good way to see the questions you would have to answer for each, and that might help you decide what you want to do with that. So let me just, I'm going to go down. So all of these next sections, see this beginning a new worshiping community, this is a grant category. So each page in here is going to have the category at the top and all of the questions you would have to answer for this section. And then depending, it gives a little bit about what funds might be used for each of these and may have a suggestion or two. And then it's going to ask you which type of grant. And the types are important because it's those upper limits of what you can apply for. So there's no point in applying for a new worshiping community grant for more than $10,000 because they're not going to give you more than 10 for a brand new community for this category. The amounts are different for every category and for whether it's that seed or growth grant, that new thing or growing something. So these are just those top end amounts. So this is kind of your go-to everything you would need for that application document. No one had this one last year, so let me scroll to one of the other ones. Beginning a new or strengthening an existing existing ministry with community partners. There were 4 awardees last year who fit into either a new ministry or a strengthening ministry. So you had the hygiene pantry at St. John's Mason City. They wanted to expand. They were expanding into face masks for the community and had moved their hygiene pantry to fit with COVID restrictions so that they would put bags together, and instead of having people come in and pick what they need, they would call and get bags together ahead of time. So that there was a contactless option. So they were able to get more supplies and material for face masks since that had become a new part of their ministry last year. You had Jeannie Smith, who's a deacon over at St. Tim's in West Des Moines, works with the Center for Social Ministry. And so she was their project leader. And they were able to get some funding for the strengthening of ministry because they were expanding their offerings to people across the state since they could move online. So it was helping to subsidize some of the smaller groups that they wouldn't have been able to do in person. You also had Newton had one of these for their, they have a blessing box with food and items and sometimes clothes during the winter for the community, and they were moving that to be housed at the site of their community partner, which is across the street from them. And then there was one more, and I apologize, I'm blanking on which one, but those are just a few of the ideas. So if you have something, and whether you're looking to start something new, or if you have something that you're looking to expand or have a way to kind of grow on what you're already doing, this is a great grant for that. So lots of options with that one. Next, liturgical space renewal. There were several of these. Recently in the e-news, you would have seen St. Thomas's in Sioux City be featured. They took out a bunch of their back pews and had a labyrinth installed on the wood floor, and had part of what strengthened their grant was having community partners who were ready and willing and wanted to use that for different types of activities. So they had letters of support from people in the community. The way station also got one of these grants because they used it to make their space ADA accessible. So they had a ramp put on the front of the building and made a bathroom ADA compliant. So yeah, and like I mentioned earlier, this grant, none of these grants are for regular building maintenance, but if you're looking to make space more accessible or use it for new purposes, this is your grant for that. Partnering to provide partial salary and benefits for recently ordained clergy within the last 2 years. Had one of these that was St. Paul's in Des Moines got this grant for Father Zeb, for those of you that know him. And so, yeah, had one of those this year. And yeah, as long as the person was ordained within the past 2 years, that's the big part to note about that grant. Formation for youth and young adults. There was one of these grants this past year, and that's Eric Rucker, who's a deacon, member at St. Andrews. He works with Simpson Youth Academy. And so this grant was to help them offer scholarships to Episcopalian and LGBTQIA youth. So he was their project lead for that. But obviously Simpson College is a non-Episcopal entity, and we really do encourage those partnerships. So lots of options for what that one can look like. Leadership development, we did not have any grants for this this year, but it would be for an individual or group to participate in some type of leadership development opportunity or to offer one. So I'll be excited to see if we have any ideas on this one this year. Evangelism, there was one of those this past year, and that was to St. John's Dubuque. They started doing an online before Compline service where they would invite speakers in, and this is all on Zoom. They have an intern who's helping with some of this now, and they started doing something with their youth as well, like a children's activity too. So yeah, this is a very broad category of grants, so lots can fit into this one in particular. So if you're kind of unsure and evangelism is kind of your main focus, it's a category for that. And then expanding tools and technology. I believe this one was the most, we had the most applications, and that was 5 of them. So most people ended up either adding to technology that they'd already started or just kind of boosting up what they were allowed to do to get their services online. There are some congregations that are working together to hold Compline services together or Bible studies together. And so getting whatever technology is needed. If you're looking at applying for this grant in particular, I'd want to connect you with Meg Wagner to talk through your needs, and she has a great idea of what has worked well for other people and maybe what some struggles have been. So she's a great resource for this particular category. And so those are the 8 categories, and then the last set of questions is all going to be on budget. Everyone has to answer the exact same budget questions. So we are nearly out of time for this session, although you're welcome to stay on, but what other questions do you all have that I can help you with today?
Very helpful.
Yes, very helpful. So we have to decide whether it's a seed grant or a growth grant. Do we decide that, or does the committee, or is that just something that we bring in when we have our initial conversation?
Bring it into that initial conversation, but the easy way to think about it, it should be pretty clear to tell. If it's something new, it's going to be a seed grant, even if it's something that you're building and growing either capacity or reach. So if you're reaching new people or reaching people in new places or new ways, but it's growing on an existing ministry, it's going to fit into that growth grant. But yes, talking with the committee is always, they're a great help with that if you're still unsure. You don't have to have that set before you go in.
Okay.
What else? And I know this was a lot too, so feel free to call me. I did record this, so I think Meg is going to work her magic somehow to make these things available for people. But I'm happy to walk through all this again, because I know this is a lot of information to do in just a 30-minute session, and I don't expect you to remember where to find pretty much any of this. But know it's on the website and available, but feel free to give me a call or an email as well. And I'm happy to set up individual one-on-one Zooms, especially if you have a partner or two that you're working with and thinking about doing the grant with. Happy to go through this with you all with them too.
Good. Awesome.
Thank you so much. You've been very, very helpful.
You're very welcome.